Welcome to SUSECON Digital 2022. So, the topic of this session is enterprise wide Kubernetes adoption, principles, practices, and processes. So, a little bit brief about me before we start this journey over the next 30 minutes. Currently, I'm working as an assistant director, cloud practice at Ernst& Young EY. Before that, I used to lead the Cloud Center of Excellence CCOE team at Accenture. I have around 10 plus years of IT experience and I have been working on public cloud technologies for around 5 to 6 years now since 2017. So, what is the agenda of this session? I have divided this session into four parts. Section 1, to discuss standard Kubernetes adoption process in an enterprise. In section 2, we discuss some of the issues or challenges in scaling a Kubernetes adoption initiative across the enterprise. In section 3, I discuss potential or feasible solutions to handle those issues or challenges. In section 4, I discuss how a central excellence team for containers or Kubernetes technologies can or should operate. Okay, let's get started with section 1, which is discussing the standard Kubernetes adoption process within an enterprise. So, Kubernetes is everywhere. That is a de facto thing now. As per the 2021 CNCF survey, which got released, I think, on February of this year, 96% of organizations are either using or evaluating Kubernetes. So, it is safe to say that Kubernetes has crossed the chasm and is quickly becoming the de facto standard for deploying applications in the cloud. So everybody, every single enterprise, every single startup, everybody is interested in understanding how we can adopt Kubernetes, how we can adopt cloud native technologies and embark on our digital transformation journey. But managing Kubernetes at scale across hundreds of projects or teams in an enterprise is a feat in itself, and it's an extremely difficult proposition to handle. First, how do we define an enterprise? So, when I say it's very difficult to scale Kubernetes adoption across an enterprise, so what is an enterprise? An enterprise is typically companies like Ford, General Electrics, Walmart, United Health Group. So, it has multiple departments and multiple locations, hundreds of teams, and there is a possibility that it's globally distributed. One team in New York, one team in Kerala. Also, everybody has some clear responsibilities hierarchies, and you only know your direct colleagues well, and everyone else is sitting somewhere else, basically. So, an enterprise in itself is a beast, it's a big thing to tame. And okay, what do we mean by scale? So, scale means trying to do something rapidly across a large number of entities. Okay. So, basically, in enterprise, anything, any initiative that you undertake for the enterprise as a whole typically involves hundreds of teams and thousands or hundreds of developers, engineers, project managers, scrum masters. So, for a small team doing something and the same thing being done by an enterprise is a whole different ball game altogether. So that is why we want to understand how we can scale and ensure that this Kubernetes adoption initiative is successful across all the teams in my enterprise, not only just 2 to 3 teams. So, how is it operating today? So, today, if you see medium to big enterprises, this is typically how it is operated. Some developer teams have started working on Kubernetes. They've delivered a successful project on Kubernetes, as a result of which more teams get onboarded to Kubernetes by seeing the success of the earlier teams. But this is inorganic growth. There is a lack of central governance from the enterprise. Every team is kind of doing their own thing. There are no best practices or best standards or guidelines which can be followed, which can be adopted across the enterprise. So, finally, when at scale, when everybody is trying to do something, but nobody has a clue as to why things are failing, nobody has some general guidance. Okay, these are some of the things that you should follow, but no, this is not happening. So when more and more teams are failing in their Kubernetes journey and not able to unlock the true value from a Kubernetes transformation initiative or a cloud native transformation initiative, so new teams will now start to get put off. Because of the failures of the previous teams, they will say, oh, no, no, let's not do that because I might also fail. And finally, as a result of this entire loop, your at scale adoption initiative will fail. This is something that is happening today across enterprises, which I have personally seen while consulting with many companies. So this is okay. We understand how it is happening today. But what are some of the issues? I kind of gave you a brief understanding of what is getting wrong, but what are some of the issues? And how do we address those issues? That is the idea, right? How do we address those issues so that my adoption initiative can scale across the entire enterprise? So this is something that I call the great Kubernetes divide. So within an enterprise, there is something called the current state where we are. Most of the enterprises, medium to big sized enterprises are today. So every team is kind of doing their own thing. So here I have team one, team two, team three. They're all working in silos. Maybe team one is using Terraform to create a Kubernetes cluster with a few configurations, few parameters. Team three might be doing it from the portal. Team two might be doing it using Azure ARM or Bicep. And all of those configurations might be a little different here and there. Okay. But what do we want? We want the target state which is shown here. We want all teams to follow a set of standard guidelines, a set of standard practices and patterns. But this divide between this current state and the target state is very hard to overcome. And this is what we call the what I like to call the great Kubernetes or cloud native divide between what we have and what we want to achieve. This is the kind of divide that we want to scale across, that we want to overcome. Because today you can understand that this current state will not be able to scale, it will not be sustainable enough. We want to go to a target state. So Kubernetes is really hard. This is something that is universally acknowledged. So for example, the Docker co-founder Sebastian Pal had said about Kubernetes that simplicity has not won. I love Kubernetes, but it is not for normal humans. So everybody of us, we know that Kubernetes in itself is hard. But scaling Kubernetes is harder. By itself, Kubernetes is hard, but when I want to scale Kubernetes across a large number of teams, it increases. The difficulty, the complexity of the initiative increases exponentially. But what are some of the challenges? Number one challenge today is there is a lack of enterprise grade Kubernetes management platform that will work well across all big enterprises. There is a genuine lack of those kind of platform, which is kind of some companies are coming and filling up that gap to some extent. But still, overall, if you discuss this with enterprises, many people will say this is a lack. This is a serious challenge, this lack of enterprise grade management platforms. Second is lack of available resources or engineers who know Kubernetes or cloud native well, which we call resource scarcity. Third is Kubernetes in itself is extremely difficult because Kubernetes is mostly used for loosely coupled distributed applications, fault tolerant, scalable, which are by default much more harder to design than monoliths. The normal monoliths, they are very harder to design. And finally, Kubernetes itself is kind of evolving. So the standards around it, even though Kubernetes might be there for a long time now, I think 7, 8, 9 years, but the standards around it are still evolving. Nobody still has got a full grasp of it. For example, in a way we can trust the Java platform. We are not able to completely, you can say, completely adopt the Kubernetes promise to the full extent today at an enterprise level. That is the idea. So, in section 2 and in section 1, I kind of gave you a context on these problems which anybody, any enterprise can face when they're starting this journey, right? So, this context gives us a lot to think about. We all of us, we know that Kubernetes and cloud native technologies is the key to unlock potential new opportunities for my business and for my clients. Everybody wants to be scalable, everybody wants to be fault tolerant, resilient, but at what expense? And what can we do to ensure that once we start along this cloud native journey, we don't have to stop? We don't have to fall back and look that, okay, let's now go back to the earlier way of working. No, we want to be successful. We want our initiative to be successful. We don't want just 2 or 3 or 10 teams to use Kubernetes as the de facto application deployment standard. No, we want to enable our development teams to adopt Kubernetes and cloud native technologies seamlessly and at scale. So, fortunately, in enterprise IT, most of the problems that we come across have solutions also. So, some of the solutions that are listed below here, and I will go over each of these solutions in great detail, are standardization, self service catalog, automated cluster provisioning, creating a Kubernetes center of excellence, automated compliance via master policies, and a lot of this. So, these are some of the solutions, but let's deep dive into them to understand. So, the number one important thing that you need to do is standardization. So, the easiest way to embrace the adoption of a new technology or a new tool chain or a new process is to enforce some sort of standardization across all the verticals within an enterprise. This is not for Kubernetes adoption. This is also for microservice adoption. This is also for DevSecOps adoption. Any sort of adoption, we need standardization because at scale, you need standardization to be actually successful. So, just to give an example, every single cluster that is provisioned within an enterprise should be provisioned from the same template or script. It should not be that I am provisioning it in some way, but the other team is provisioning it in some other way. There should be no deviation. Every single Kubernetes cluster should look just like the other one. No team should write their custom script to set up or operate a cluster from scratch. We should have methods and we should have processes and principles in place so that all of my teams can take full advantage of the platform that we as an enterprise are offering them. So we need to go above the Kubernetes abstraction and provide some sort of a Kubernetes as a service or as a platform offering to our development teams. If we let them do it on their own, everybody will do it in their own way. But we cannot afford that. Not when we are trying to scale across hundreds and thousands of clusters and teams. We need to adopt some sort of a standardized template, not only in the coding, not only just for the cluster creation. This standardization should be at every level of my Kubernetes or cloud native journey, starting from change management process, starting from cluster patching, cluster management, deployment to the cluster. Every single aspect of my cloud native journey and my Kubernetes deployment should be standardized. There should be no deviation, absolutely no deviation. So, today, if you go to the Azure cloud and want to get a VM, they offer you a few customizations as per, but can you tell them that no, Azure, I want to do it in a new way, give me another template? No, this will not work. Similarly, within an enterprise IT, we should not offer that kind of privilege to the development team to do it in their own way, because initially that freedom will look very nice, very exciting, but finally the same freedom and the same freedom to take options and to choose options, selective options, will actually end up in hampering the overall adoption journey for the enterprise. Second is self service. We should have automation built in. Everything starting from the cluster creation to cluster patch management, everything should be done in an automatic manner via a self-service portal. There should not be any intervention from the product or the operations team. I should not have to write 10 emails to 10 different people to get a single cluster. A mature enterprise should provide the cluster creation and the cluster management or the operation functionalities as standard IT service catalogs. Just like, for example, you request a new IT mailbox, you will request a new Kubernetes cluster. So basically, ideally, we should have some sort of a self-service portal where I will log in, I will authenticate, I will select my project, I will select my budget, my code, and all of that, and then I will select a few parameters. Basically, okay, I need a Kubernetes cluster, I need the CNI plugin, and all of that I will select, and then I will click on deployment, and it will deploy for me. So a standard self-service catalog might look like this. For example, this is just a mock-up UI. You go there and you select, get an option to provision a standalone cluster. You get an option to scale up or down your cluster. You get an option to download your kubeconfig file. You get an option to create a service account and so on. So this is the idea I'm trying to say, that we need to provide self-service, and that is how you increase your adoption in a controlled manner within the guardrails of the enterprise. Third is you need to provide a wide variety of Kubernetes offerings. You need to provide enough options to the user to make it interesting, because Very frankly, within an enterprise, not all needs are the same. Similarly, we should give the developers the freedom as a platform to choose something which is important for the business. For example, we should not restrict them unless absolutely necessary, that you should only create clusters on Azure Kubernetes service. For example, a lot of the deployment of the team is already on Amazon. So we should also provide the option for them to deploy a cluster on EKS or Google environment as GKE. So this is some kind of flexibility that we are offering them as part of this wide variety of catalogs of Kubernetes offerings. So another option, for example, flexibility could be some teams might want a dedicated single kind of tenant, a single cluster for their client. That is one option, which is a little bit maybe more costly, but much provides much stronger isolation benefits. On the other hand, some customers which might maybe they are doing POCs or maybe small web applications, stateless applications, they might want to leverage a multi-tenant solution, meaning they might just want to request one namespace within the cluster. So it can be different ways. So the idea that I'm trying to say is that you should not restrict your development community or your engineering community to a huge extent. You should offer them flexible options. Only then they will choose your platform. Otherwise, they will find a way to bypass your platform. Fourth, which is very, very important, is to create a Kubernetes or container center of excellence. You need a central team to be in charge of the overall standardization and the overall governance of your adoption journey. Because no matter what you name it doesn't matter whether you name it Cloud Center of Excellence, Container Center of Excellence, Kubernetes Center of Excellence. Somebody should be there, some team should be there, some governance board should be there, which is responsible for all the Kubernetes workloads that have been deployed across the enterprise. This team might not only be consultants or architects, this might even include a support module. So basically, this team is responsible for the entire cloud native ecosystem of my enterprise, starting from providing good guidelines to support tickets to operational metrics and all of that. So it needs to be a complete team that provides a full length of services and has a central control over all my deployments. Some of the functions of the central governance team could be to maintain the central set of guidelines and architectural best practices, which will be followed by all teams. Another use case could be to evangelize Kubernetes adoption. Okay, advocate as developer advocates or Kubernetes advocates raise awareness, conduct roadshow sessions so that more and more people start adopting Kubernetes. You could even maintain a Kubernetes academy, for example, like the Civo Academy that publishes tutorials. You give free lab access, hands on workshops to help engineers skill upon Kubernetes. You provide developer guidance also so that the developer experience when using Kubernetes or using your platform is streamlined. The developer tools are in tune with the needs of the development community, and very good tools you need to provide so that they can easily deploy to Kubernetes. Monitor and manage all the Kubernetes clusters and ensure that cross-cutting concerns which are not dependent on individual teams, that is like security, disaster recovery, backup, they should be handled by this team at a central level. Some concerns will be handled by the local team which is in charge of the deployment of that Kubernetes cluster, but cross-cutting concerns should be handled by this team. Also, you should conduct architectural reviews of all these designs of all these cloud native workloads to ensure that the deployments that are being done by these teams is aligned with the enterprise wide standards. So this is one of the ways to foster Kubernetes adoption. Manage a documentation repository. This is also very important. Documentation is much more important than we give it credit for. It is one of the primary drivers for increased adoption across an enterprise. This center of excellence team that I mentioned just, it should be in charge of publishing extensive documentation on how to get started with using or leveraging the platform Kubernetes offering, general guidance on how to adopt Kubernetes, architectural best practices, detailed user manuals, tutorials, how to guides. If you do not have good documentation, your developer community will not use your tools. This is a well proven fact. Very important fact is to have good quality, responsible, updated, up to date documentation for your platform offerings, which is very important. Manage cross-cutting concerns centrally. So I have highlighted this in passing in point 4 also. So cross-cutting concerns are concerns which are applicable for every project within an enterprise, not only one project or two projects. Every project which is embarking on this cloud native journey, or which is adopting the Kubernetes, the cloud native platform offerings from the enterprise, all of them are concerned with some of the activities like backup, disaster recovery. So does it make sense for every single team to invest time, effort, money, energy into these things? No. These cross-cutting concerns should be handled centrally. By whom? By that same Kubernetes Center of Excellence or Container Center of Excellence team. They should be structured in such a way that they can scale and handle all of these requests. So I am not asking that there is no responsibility for the local team. No, the local team has responsibility for the application that is deployed on that cluster. They are responsible for the code, they are responsible maybe for the pipelines and all that. But at a high level, these cross-cutting concerns should be the responsibility of the center of excellence team. Some of these cross-cutting concerns could be log aggregation, disaster recovery, distributed tracing, backup, ingress controllers, security, service discovery, compliance. So this should be handled by that central excellence team. Very, very important point 7, establishing a consistent support model. So you cannot expect your development teams or your engineering teams and service line teams to just adopt a product because you are asking them to, without providing them obviously good support. So there should be that central SRE or Kubernetes operations team. This team should be available ideally 24/7 based on the nature of the workloads. For premium workloads it should be 24/7. For not so important workloads it might be just a weekday support. Whatever it is, they will be responsible for monitoring and managing all the Kubernetes installations which have been deployed across the enterprise. There should be a very strong collaboration between the central excellence team and the SRE team and the DevOps practice, so that all of the important metrics are being monitored, say using Prometheus, Grafana, whatever. And basically, these teams are responsible to ensure that my platform is up and running. So just like Azure is responsible to ensure that the underlying compute is up and running, similarly, the Kubernetes Center of Excellence team and its associated functions of SRE, operations, support, whatever you call it, is at a high level responsible for ensuring that my platform, my Kubernetes or cloud native platform that I'm offering to my enterprise users is available, is up, is highly available, highly scalable, fault tolerant, resilient. They are the people that will be responsible for the overall experience of the end users. Without a good support model, without good support engineers who are proactive, who are empathetic to the problems of the clients, this adoption initiative cannot succeed. Automation. Every initiative, at the heart of it you have automation. But some of the problems that I've seen enterprises, they have done a lot of automation in the self-service part of it. So there is an automation to, for example, deploy the Kubernetes cluster, to scale it up, to scale it down, and all of that. But you should also have automation, standard automations, to also help in the development life cycle. A Kubernetes cluster by itself does not add any value. I need to deploy my Docker file. I need to deploy my container image. I need to deploy my Helm charts to the cluster. So we need to provide some sort of standard pipelines, some sort of reference guidelines, not only for the deployment of the cluster, but also for the deployment of the application. This automation should be self-service or well documented so that everybody in my enterprise can consume it, and I don't have to write another pipeline just to deploy a single Helm chart. I should already have some standard pipelines which I can quickly download and import into my overall DevOps thing so that I can deploy also. 9. Central governance and compliance. Again, this is very related to that cross-cutting concerns things. Security and regulatory compliance is very, very important, right? So this is just like all other concerns, but I'm mentioning it more here because it is much more important from an infosec or an overall security posture of the enterprise perspective. So policies should be applied to all Kubernetes clusters from a central repository. So say for example, the enterprise is aligned to the NIST guidelines. So those NIST policies should be enforced from the center of excellence team. So the platform as a whole should not allow any non-compliant workloads to run on it. So for example, if you have a policy that you will not allow root users container images to run as root, then if you enforce that policy, you should enforce it from the central compliance perspective. You should not allow any team to override it unless and until they have a good justification that is approved by infosec. But yes, some teams, some projects might be more security sensitive than others. So they might ask for more granular, more specific, in depth policies. So that can also be added from a case to case basis. But at least the central governance and central compliance should be there. So I have said 9 steps, and if you follow at least some of these 9 steps, you will get some sort of an idea and perspective on how to increase the adoption of your container initiatives or Kubernetes initiatives across the enterprise. In section 4, we discuss how the central excellence team should be structured and can operate. So this can be a standard structure of my central excellence team. So as you can see, the central excellence team is divided into two parts. One is the consulting or the governance or architecture arm of that team, which is this container central of excellence or container platform management team. But another is that IT support team, which is equally important, providing 24/7 support as an example. And these teams are linked. So maybe the container IT support team is kind of reporting to the central excellence team also. Then the central excellence team is also has an overlap with the overall enterprise architecture practice and the overall cloud solution architecture practice. And then the individual product teams, product 1, product 2, product 3 teams, are kind of overlapping with the central excellence team. They're using the central excellence team to achieve their business objectives. The project gets deployed and it's okay, it achieves sunset or whatever. So this is the overall idea on how you can structure, and this is something that I have done successfully in some companies I have consulted with. Provided this is successful, so what can we do? So once it is successful, how will that consumption process look like? So say my solution architect gets a business requirement. The solution architect feels that containers are a good choice for the compute layer. So then they will go to the documentation published by the center excellence team. Then they will check some of the architectural arm of the Kubernetes center of excellence team, get good guidance. Once they get all the guidance and establish that Kubernetes is the preferred option, they will raise a request via the self-service portal that I discussed. Automation will run in the background, it will create the cluster. So the solution architect will now get a fully functional InfoSec compliant Kubernetes cluster that is secured and aligned with the best practices of the enterprise. Once this infra is present, the solution architect will now need help in deploying the application via Helm chart or something. So the Kubernetes Center of Excellence team already has some documentation, some standard reference pipelines. So the solution architect will use these automation building blocks, then package the application into container images and maybe deploy them using Helm charts. Finally, the fully functional application is now available and it is deployed on this enterprise managed Kubernetes cluster. They will simply hand it over to the support team who will then take over the support. As simple as that. This is a good cycle that we have enforced. So some of the learnings that I want to conclude with. So try to make your enterprise Kubernetes offering as cloud agnostic as possible. Let them run on GKE, let them run on AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, Red Hat, OpenShift. The more flexibility you offer them, the more adoption it will come. Do not restrict yourself only to the Kubernetes deployment, meaning the creation of the cluster. Also focus on the entire developer experience around Kubernetes, starting from the IDE experience to CI/CD to deployment pipelines and everything. Finally, get high level leadership buy in. This will ensure that all dev teams are aligned and they're focused on this approach. Without executive buy-in, no matter how many policies you put in place, the adoption initiative can fail as quickly as you start it. So finally, thank you all for attending this session. I hope this has helped you in understanding some of the challenges that you can face when you try to scale your adoption journey across the enterprise, and some of these solutions can help you maybe to be a little bit more aware, and then you can put this all of these principles and practices in the proper perspective of your overall engineering or digital transformation journey. With this, I will like to say have a very good SUSECON Digital 2022. It was a pleasure presenting here.